forever? Is that a temporary thing? Because it seems to cut against the dedication to being open and transparent.
At the time, yes, we're withholding that name.
That, of course, was NewsNation's Joe Khalil asking NASA yesterday why it wasn't releasing the name of the person it says will be overseeing research into UFOs at the government agency. But hours later, NASA backtracked. They announced that Mark McInerney is taking that title. In the meantime, questions about the many reports of unidentified objects being spotted in our skies continues. Joining us is Bryce Zabel, co-host of the Need to Know podcast and an investigative journalist. Bryce, thanks for being here. I saw this yesterday, and it was like they've got this press conference. They're going to roll it out. We got a new head, a UAP director at NASA. Who is it? Can't tell you. What do you mean you can't tell us? Wow. And then hours later, they told us. It was almost like on day one, they tried to be transparent, but were forced into being transparent.
Yeah, it's not the first time, probably won't be the last. I just say go Joe over at NewsNation, because he asked the right question. You know, the report and the news conference was a mixed bag. I mean, in many respects, I thought it was positive. But on the other hand, those kind of things like about the transparency really did undermine it. They were disappointing. You know, you talked about, the transparency aspect of the new director not being announced. Well, first of all, the guy's been on the job for a while. Why wasn't he there at the conference? I mean, if he's the new guy on the job, not only that, before he had that job, he was also a liaison to the Department of Defense on this very issue. So I would think he'd be a pretty good guy to have there. So I was a little disappointed about that.
I want to get your reaction to this. Bill Nelson, NASA administrator, former astronaut. One comment that he made. Watch.
The NASA independent study team did not find any evidence that UAP have an extraterrestrial origin. But we don't know what these UAP are.
I raised an eyebrow now.
Well, okay. First of all, NASA's had 80 years, well, actually since 1958, when they were first created, to get involved in this. NASA was even asked back in 1977, rather, by Jimmy Carter's science director to look into UFOs, and they did something pretty unusual. They just flat out rejected the president, said we're not going to do that, and I thought when I heard Bill Nelson say that would take the cake. But the one that really bothered me is he was asked about whistleblower David Grush, who has famously been on NewsNation, and he's also testified to Congress for 2 hours in public. And when he was asked about him, this is what Bill Nelson said about that. He said, well, what he said, if I recall, having only seen this on the nightly news, was that he had a friend who knew about a UFO locked up in a warehouse. He also said he had another friend that knew there were parts of an alien. Okay, I'm sorry. This guy is the director of NASA. He's been assigned to look into this. He's devoted NASA resources to it. And there is a congressional investigation with 3 witnesses, 2 pilots and a whistleblower, who's testified already for 11 hours to the U.S. government behind closed doors. But he doesn't watch that in a month and a half that he has to look at it. And instead, he starts talking about things like that. So I would just say this, for crying out loud, that is not the way forward. And I think NASA is sort of playing into, well, you probably know this, but NASA used to be referred to by people as what never a straight answer. And that's kind of what I felt watching it the other day.
Bryce Zabel, thank you, sir. Appreciate the time.
Hey, Congress is working to find hard evidence of alien life, and they're promising transparency to the public. So why was this week's House Oversight Committee hearing with NASA behind closed doors and shut off to the media? Well, several people on social media posed that very question. Congressman Tim Burchett says he was disappointed and suspicious of some of NASA's answers. Take a listen.
Everything is available from NASA. They have no secret stuff. And then we said, well, wait a minute. You mean, the satellites? And they kept saying, no, everything's open, as far as they knew, as far as they knew.
Well, let's bring in Nick Pope, former UK Minister of Defense, working for the Ministry of Defense. Nick, you and I have talked about this before. We've touched on this before. The public is upset. The meeting was closed. Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, who is leading the House Oversight Committee, is frustrated. Is NASA sending mixed messages?
They are, yes. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for NASA on this. I think they're trying to do the right thing, but they've had a couple of missteps over the last few days. When they had their meeting to announce their report, they said they'd appointed a director of research, and then they refused to name him, and then they named him a few hours later because of the backlash. And then, of course, we had this session yesterday in the House Oversight Committee closed to the media and the public. Now, some sessions are closed, that's fine, but when your whole central point is about openness and transparency, yes, it absolutely sends mixed messages.
One of the things I think the problem is, you touched on this, is that either you are going to be clear and transparent from the beginning or say nothing at all. I think it's the back and forth that has so many people frustrated. NASA says it only deals with unclassified data so they can be transparent to the public. Does NASA likely have that data that they just don't want to make public?
Well, I think they do have some, and they certainly have access to it because they now are working quite closely with the Pentagon's ARROW unit, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who has the lead on this. But this runs the risk of a classic left-hand, right-hand situation that NASA say that they're looking for UAP, they're looking for the evidence, they want to look at the data, but they say they're only going to look at the unclassified data, where all the time the DoD and parts of the intelligence community already have classified data that could help NASA. So it's going to take some very careful management to integrate that.
And Nick, I'm glad you said that. I've got less than 30 seconds because we already know that some of the information is classified because they have some that is unclassified. How will that affect NASA as they move forward?
Well, I think it's going to be a challenge, but I do think they've got to up their game a little bit on this and be open and transparent, as they've said they'll be. And the Pentagon has to do the same.
Nick Pope, is there life out there?
Yes.
Nick Pope, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
All right, let's talk about this big news out of NASA. No question, it's a first. NASA has never put out a report on UFOs before, okay? They say, we don't know about any aliens, okay? Now, some people are going to believe that. I believe you should. Some will not. The problem is NASA and the government have fed the conspiracies, have fed the unknown and even nonsense because they haven't told us things that they could. So the bigger takeaway is NASA's going to use billions and billions worth of resources to find out what UFO sightings are really about. Do you really think the government doesn't know anything about any of these sightings? Plus, they're calling you to help out. They're saying they're looking to develop an app for you to send your alien footage straight to them. Now, that's a good idea, because if you think about it, and as Neil deGrasse Tyson said last night on the show, you don't have to be an astrophysicist for this to make sense. Why is it that we only see them in, like, military-controlled airspace? All that we have in this world, all the atmosphere, all the people with cameras. Shouldn't there be sightings all over the place? Let's bring in UFO whistleblower Lieutenant Ryan Graves, who testified at the historic hearing in July. It's good to see you, sir.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well, and thank you for being with us. Tell us why this report to you is met with optimism.
Well, yes, I think this report is a big step forward. Pilots and aviators have been told that this is something that they should either ignore or pretend didn't happen for many decades now. And for the first time, NASA has taken a very big step forward in a way that was not congressionally mandated to say, hey, we're going to treat this as a serious scientific issue. And while that doesn't necessarily give us all the answers now, it's certainly a step in the right direction.
I agree. I'm just greedy. And I also believe that they are holding back a tremendous amount, especially here because this report is based on unclassified information. To your knowledge and in your reasoned belief, based on your experience, do you think that there is plenty that they could share without compromising national security about what and who has sent things into our airspace?
Well, I don't know what type of information NASA may or may not have that is classified, but we have to remember that it might actually be to NASA's advantage to be in the open source on this topic. By not having the limitations that the DoD normally has in regards to classified information, they hopefully can be much more transparent as they try to move the process forward. We've seen how classification can be used as kind of a whitewash for not allowing any type of information to come out from the Department of Defense. So if we want NASA to engage on that type of work, we might find less communication, not more.
Two interesting points. One is your take on the need to deal with the stigma here and the significance that the NASA boss says he believes in the possibility of aliens and that NASA wants to end the stigma among civilian pilots. Why is that important?
It's important because if there's a stigma there, we're just not going to know the full extent of this problem. Pilots are not going to report it. They're going to fear for their careers. I was very happy to hear that NASA is going to be utilizing their Aviation Safety Reporting System, or ASRS, to be able to, they're going to modify that system to allow pilots to directly report UAP on there. That's going to allow for further analysis. That's going to allow for data sharing. And that's just going to move this conversation forward. Now, my expectation that since NASA will be an open source resource for this information, won't deal with classified data, that this information should be fully accessible to the public, which should now enable greater and greater transparency.
Right. I love the idea of the app because, you know, we had Neil deGrasse Tyson, you know him, the astrophysicist. He was on last night. And he was like, look, what makes him skeptical is why are we so reliant on the government to tell us whether or not there are things flying around? You have so many points of observation and so many people with such high level of cameras these days, you know, connected to our own phones. And this app that they're thinking about would really motivate citizenry to send in all these things instead of having it just, you know, fuel this cottage industry on the internet.
Well, absolutely. You know, we saw the same problems between commercial aviators and military aviators. Military aviators typically had more tools and sensors that allowed them to identify these objects, fly closer to it, and then utilize their camera or their eyeballs to get a better identification. Commercial pilots simply don't have that option, and so you see the same effect there, where commercial pilots simply don't have as good data as military pilots. Of course, we would like to gather as much information from the general public as we could, but we have to be very careful about the quality of that data that we intake. Using machine learning, as suggested at the press conference today, NASA's press conference, I think is a way to manage all that data. But we also need to look at more specific tools, such as high-definition cameras, space assets that NASA utilizes for other scientific research, and utilize those for the investigation of UAP.
Here now, writer and podcaster Micah Hanks, host of the Micah Hanks program, which delves into UFO sightings. Micah, thank you so much for your time. We just heard from Joe there. No bombshells coming out of this report. Is this what you expected?
Well, I think to an extent we all sort of expected that this would be a little less than we all hoped for. You know, my publication, The Debrief, which, you know, has played a very crucial role in breaking some of these stories, including some of the whistleblower claims recently. We've been watching this now for years, and we always go in with measured expectations. But I have to say, taking the bird's eye view here, it's good to see science being applied toward this. I know that there were limitations with this study, but with the resources they had, the time they had, the funding, it's a breath of fresh air in many ways to see science being applied toward this and seeing officials now with multiple agencies, not just the DoD and its All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, but also with NASA now saying, look, we've got some really sophisticated equipment looking at this, and we don't know what all these things are.
You know, Mike, I like what you said there about science being applied to this. The report acknowledges more data is needed because some encounters still can't be explained. What kind of data do you think they still need?
Well, this has always been the problem when it comes to UAP, or, you know, what have historically been known as UFOs, unidentified flying objects. People see things. People say that they've had experiences where they saw things in the skies. But really only since the Second World War have we had different kinds of instrumental capabilities with radar and now more advanced systems in the modern era that allow us to corroborate those visual sightings. So NASA is saying, look, we've got excellent satellite systems that are observing the Earth 24 hours a day from multiple vantage points. That would be useful. We also can put our air networks to work, you know, and also try and get better visuals. Basically, everybody's got a small sensor system in their pocket with smartphones, so we can put smartphones to work and be collecting imagery and other sensor data, even from those devices people carry around with them. So some of this stuff is readily accessible, literally at people's fingertips, but NASA's saying it needs to be combined in the approach toward trying to collect better data and a whole lot more of it.
All right, Micah, really quickly, before we let you go, do you think there's more they're not telling us?
Well, obviously, there were some issues with transparency today. They wouldn't name the new director of the UAP research efforts within NASA. Of course, there's going to be some things that the public can't know about. I do appreciate NASA's efforts toward transparency. We can always hope we'll learn as much as possible.
We certainly hope that. All right, Micah Hanks, thank you.
We are awaiting that report from NASA. They're going to have a news conference here, and it looks like it's about to get underway. I just want to lay out for you what we will be hearing. The findings from this UFO study that was commissioned last year, and already we know it's 36 pages. They are offering new and robust data acquisition methods into UAPs. They are calling for systematic reporting of framework, so more engagement with the public. Let's listen in as NASA reveals their findings.
On a report from an independent study team on unidentified anomalous phenomena. We have 4 speakers here today. We have Bill Nelson, our NASA administrator, Nikki Fox, the Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate, Dan Evans, the Assistant Deputy Associate Administrator for Research within the Science Mission Directorate, and David Spergel, who is the president of the Simons Foundation and was also the chair of this particular independent study team. I will ask everybody in the room to please silence your cell phones. We will get started with everybody giving a few opening remarks, and then we will take questions. We will take questions both in the room and then from the phones. And for now, I will hand it over to the administrator.
Thanks so much, and thanks for coming today. NASA searches for the unknown in air and space. It's in our DNA. From digging on Mars with the Perseverance rover in those little titanium tubes that we intend to go back and pick up, digging in a dry lake bed near the mouth of a river. Now we're going up to the top of the cliff where the scientists feel that there could be the best examples of if there were life there millions of years ago. Whether we're dealing with Perseverance or the James Webb Space Telescope, which searches for exoplanets with signs of habitability, we are looking for signs of life, past and present. And it's in our DNA to explore and to ask why things are the way they are. In June of last year, NASA commissioned an independent study team to examine unidentified anomalous phenomena. We did so with a few goals in mind. First, to examine how NASA can use our expertise and instruments to study UAP from a scientific perspective. Second, shift the conversation about UAP from sensationalism to science, and to make sure that whatever we find or whatever we recommend, to make sure that information is shared transparently around the world. There's a global fascination with UAP. On my travels, one of the first questions I often get is about these sightings. And much of that fascination is due to the unknown nature of it. Think about it. Most UAP sightings result in very limited data. That makes it even more difficult to draw scientific conclusions about the nature of UAP. And so this independent study team brought together some of the world's leading scientists, data, and artificial intelligence experts, aerospace safety specialists, all with a specific charge from me, which is to tell how to apply the full focus of science and data to UAP. And this is the first time that NASA has taken concrete action to seriously look into UAP. And this independent study team was just that, independent. Now, NASA has a statutory authority to look for life in the universe. And when you think of the universe, and especially what we have learned from the James Webb Space Telescope, how vast that it is. We knew before, and it was a NASA scientist, Dr. John Mather, who got the Nobel that determined that the universe was 13.8 billion years old. And over the years, particularly accelerated in the last century, we have an understanding that, of course, ours is not the only galaxy. And there are billions and billions of galaxies, and each of those galaxies, including our own, have billions and billions of stars. And with the James Webb looking at the exoplanets, we are now beginning to discover, and somewhere out there, we will discover another medium-sized stony planet around a medium-sized sun or star at just the right distance, not too far, not too close, with a tilt in its axis that rotates, that has carbon, that will have a habitable atmosphere. If you ask me, do I believe there's life in a universe that is so vast that it's hard for me to comprehend how big it is? My personal answer is yes. But I asked some of our scientists. As a matter of fact, the Washington Post editorial board asked us to come down to the question, what is the mathematical probability that there is life out there in the universe? And if you calculate in billions of stars, in billions of galaxies, that there's replicated what I just said, another stony planet. The answer was, what's the likelihood? At least 1 trillion. That's from our scientists. So we start this without any preconceived notions, but understanding that we're in a world of discovery. And we, NASA, have taken for the first time concrete action to seriously look into UAP. And this independent study team is exactly that. It's independent. They work to develop recommendations about how NASA could better examine them from a scientific perspective. And the top takeaway from the study is that there is a lot more to learn. The NASA independent study team did not find any evidence that UAP have an extraterrestrial origin. But we don't know what these UAP are. That's why I'm announcing that NASA has appointed a NASA director of UAP research. They are being tasked with developing and overseeing the implementation of NASA's vision for UAP research. We will use NASA's expertise to work with other agencies to analyze UAP. We will use AI and machine learning to search the skies for anomalies as we have been searching the heavens and will continue to search the heavens for habitability. And NASA will do this transparently. So while today is a significant step for NASA, it's certainly not our final step. And we're going to share more with you, and I want to introduce you to Dr. Nikki Fox, who is the head of our Science Mission Directorate. Nikki.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Administrator Nelson. It's always tough to follow Bill. He's such a great speaker. But I want to thank the independent study team for their amazing service on the study and for their continued contributions towards the advancement of our nation's understanding of unidentified anomalous phenomena. UAP, as Bill just eloquently said, UAP are one of our planet's greatest mysteries, and it's really due to the limited number of high-quality data that surrounds such incidents and often renders them unidentifiable. While there are numerous eyewitness accounts and visuals associated with UAP, they're not consistent, they're not detailed, and they're not curated observations that can be used to make definitive scientific conclusions about the nature and the origin of UAP. The language of scientists is data, and data points towards a scientific conclusion to what the nature and the origin of UAP could be. That leads us to why we're here today. The independent study team's report is now public, and it can be found at science.nasa.gov/UAP. While NASA is still working to evaluate the report and to assess the independent study team's findings and recommendations, NASA is committed to immediately contributing to the federal government's unified UAP effort, and as you heard, we have appointed a director of UAP research. In their role, they will centralize communications, resources, and data analytical capabilities across the federal government to establish a robust database for the evaluation of any future data. Additionally, our Director of UAP Research will also leverage NASA's expertise in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and space-based observation tools that will support and enhance the broader government initiative into UAP. They will serve as NASA's point of contact for government entities, but especially for the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or ARROW. And this will ensure our coordinated efforts and effective communication channels. Beyond our Director of UAP Research, NASA will also advance citizen reporting by working with the public and commercial pilots to collect a broader set of data to add to the vast data repositories to not only contribute to a broader, more reliable data set for future UAP incidents, but to also contribute to the destigmatization of the important study of UAPs. And with that, it is my great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Dan Evans, who is the NASA official responsible for supporting this amazing study.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by expressing my sincere thanks to NASA Administrator Bill Nelson for directing this study. We at NASA believe that understanding UAP is vital for several reasons. First and foremost, it provides an opportunity for us to expand our understanding of the world around us. At NASA, we are committed to charting the uncharted, so this work aligns with who we are. Secondly, this study aims to enhance situational awareness. The presence of UAP raises serious concerns about the safety of our skies, and it's this nation's obligation to determine whether these phenomena pose any potential risks to airspace safety. Let's not forget that the first A in NASA is aeronautics. So by understanding the nature of UAP, we can ensure that our skies remain a safe space for all. Administrator Nelson directed us to put together an independent and external team of world-leading experts to produce a report containing a roadmap with a series of recommendations that describe how NASA could best help in the cross-government response to UAP.
All right, you are listening to a major development in UAP research in the United States. This is the first time that NASA is taking concrete action to look into UAPs. And a moment ago, you heard from Bill Nelson, a NASA administrator, and the formation of an independent study team that was formed a year ago. It includes aerospace safety specialists, and they're going to be looking into signs of life, past and present. They say it is in NASA's DNA to investigate this and pursue scientific evidence. So what they're doing is they are forming this team. They're looking for planets, a stony planet that may have habitable atmospheres for other signs of life. I think if you were listening closely there, maybe the most interesting thing is, one, they want transparency for the public and engaging the public in this conversation and taking speculation into scientific evidence, right? They want to move away from sensationalizing UAPs and the discussion around them into a conversation about science. But you heard him say the mathematical probability that there is life out there in our vast universe, calculating billions of stars in billions of galaxies. He said at least a trillion chance, according to NASA scientists, that there is life. So their curiosity, that's what they do, their scientists will begin to look into this. Again, this is the first time NASA is taking on this role. They have established a new position at NASA, the Director of UAP Research. And a lot of this, if you've been following our coverage here at NewsNation, comes on the heels and is happening because of the testimony that happened on Capitol Hill a couple of months ago as a result of our reporting and our exclusive interview with David Grush, who is a former intelligence officer who claimed that he had evidence and had interviewed individuals who had direct knowledge of aircraft that had non-human origins that were recovered in the United States. That's where we're at right now.